He sat alone in a corner cafe, dressed in a suit that screamed privilege, unaware that the woman approaching him carried the truth that could shatter his perfect world. Her clothes were torn, her eyes weary from years of sleeping on cold streets. But her voice was steady, unshaken. "I'm your mother." In that moment, the room froze. Was she a desperate stranger, or the key to a secret his wealthy father had buried for decades? What happened next would turn his life and his identity upside down. David Fowler lived a life most people could only imagine. As the only son of a powerful CEO, his days were filled with boardroom meetings, luxury cars, and dinners in places where a single plate cost more than most people made in a week. He never questioned it. Why would he? The world had always treated him like it was his by birthright. That afternoon, he sat in a polished corner cafe, scrolling through emails, sipping imported coffee, thinking about his next overseas trip. Outside, the city moved in a blur, people rushing to work, delivery bikes weaving through traffic, street vendors calling out to passers-by. He didn't notice her at first. A woman in worn clothes, her hair touched with gray, eyes sharp with something more than hunger. She was walking toward him with a truth that would rip his perfect world apart. David looked up from his phone when a shadow fell over his table. The woman's voice was low, but each word hit like a hammer. "David Fowler, I'm your mother." At first he laughed. It was the kind of laugh you give a street magician when they try to pull you into a trick. But she didn't smile. She didn't even blink. Her gaze was locked on his, steady, unflinching. "Your father's been lying to you your whole life." Her words felt like smoke creeping under a closed door, slow but suffocating. David's mind scrambled for logic. This was ridiculous. His mother had died when he was a child, or so his father had told him. And here was a homeless woman, smelling faintly of rain and asphalt, claiming to be her. "Look, I don't know what you want," he began. "I want you to know the truth," she cut in. Her tone wasn't pleading. It was sharp, almost urgent. "You've been living in a world built on a lie, and your father, he made sure of it." The cafe seemed to shrink around them. The chatter faded. The clinking of cups became distant. David told himself to stand, to walk away. But something in her eyes, something raw, kept him frozen. "If this is some kind of scam, does this look like a scam to you?" She pulled an old, worn photograph from her bag. The edges were frayed, the colors faded. In it, a younger version of the woman stood holding a baby. Him. His throat went dry. "I fought for you," she said quietly, "but I wasn't powerful enough. Your father's family didn't want me around. They made sure I disappeared." David's mind was a storm. Questions collided with memories, moments from childhood that suddenly didn't add up. Why had his father avoided talking about the past? Why were there no baby pictures with his mother? Before he could respond, the woman, Jasmine, leaned in closer. "Ask him, see if he denies it. But he won't look you in the eye when you do." That night, David couldn't sleep. Her words replayed in his head like an unwanted song. The photograph burned in his pocket. By morning, the doubt had become unbearable. He had to confront his father. When he entered his father's study, the air was thick with the smell of leather and old books. Richard Fowler didn't look up from his desk. "Dad, we need to talk." Richard sighed. "About what?" "About Jasmine." The name made his father's pen still mid-signature. Slowly, Richard set it down. For a moment, the CEO mask slipped, replaced by something almost human. "Is it true?" David's voice cracked. "Is she my mother?" Silence. Then, "Yes." The word hit harder than any lie could have. Richard's confession spilled out in fragments. He had been young. His family disapproved. They had pressured Jasmine to leave. Money was offered. Promises were made. "I thought it was the best thing for you," Richard said. "The best thing for me?" David's voice rose. "You erased her. You erased half of who I am." Richard's jaw tightened. "I gave you everything," Sharp cutting in. "You gave me a lie," David shot back. The room seemed to tremble with the weight of unspoken years. David left before his father could say more. Over the next few days, the truth gnawed at him. The image of Jasmine, weathered by life but unbroken, wouldn't leave his mind. The wealth, the privilege, the perfect world he had been born into now felt like a glass palace built on sand. Finally, he called her. "We need to talk." No cafe, no audience. Just us. They met in a quiet park as the sun dipped behind the skyline. She told him everything. The threats, the humiliation, the nights she cried herself to sleep wondering if he was safe. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. David's chest ached. The woman before him was a stranger, and yet she wasn't. She was the missing piece. But now came the question that would decide everything. Could he forgive a lifetime of lies, not just from his father, but from the world that had made it so easy to erase her? The boardroom was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking. Every seat was filled, executives in crisp suits, eyes sharp and cold. At the far end of the table sat Daniel, the CEO's only son, his jaw tight, eyes flicking. Between his father and the woman who had just stepped in from the hallway. She was thin, her coat torn, hair streaked with gray. A faint smell of rain clung to her. Some of the executives shifted in their chairs, not out of discomfort from the smell, but from her presence. She didn't belong here, not in their world, not in their air. The CEO's voice was low, controlled, but trembling with anger. "Security, remove her." The woman didn't move. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded photograph. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from years of holding back words. She placed it on the table, sliding it toward Daniel. He glanced down and froze. It was him, a much younger him, a toddler, sitting in the lap of a smiling young black woman. The same woman standing before him now. His heart slammed against his ribs. "That's not," the CEO began, but the woman's voice cut through the room. "I'm your mother." The words detonated in the air. Gasps, whispered curses. The CFO's pen dropped onto the table with a sharp click. Daniel stared at her, his mind scrambling. He had been told his mother died when he was 2. He had been told she was someone unfit to be in his life. Now she was standing here, not dead, not gone, very much alive. The CEO's face darkened. "That's enough." But the woman stepped closer, her voice rising, cracking under years of buried pain. "I raised you for 2 years, Daniel, until she jabbed a finger toward the CEO. "Took you from me. Said a woman like me wasn't good enough. Said a black woman would stain his family name." The words cut through Daniel like glass. He searched his father's face for denial, for anything, but saw only that same cold, practiced expression he'd seen in board meetings. A ripple of unease moved through the room. One of the executives tried to stand, muttering about handling this privately. But no one left. Everyone was locked in place. The CEO finally snapped. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin everything I built?" His voice was a whip crack. "You were nothing then, and you're nothing now." The woman's eyes shimmered, but her voice was steady. "Nothing? I gave you a son. I gave him love before you taught him to be ashamed of where he came from." Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. His entire life, every story, every family photo, every cold dismissal of the topic of his mother was a lie. Security moved forward, but Daniel stood, stepping between them and the woman. "No one touches her." His father's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint flashing. "Daniel, sit down." But Daniel didn't move. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made even the guards pause. "Tell me the truth, all of it, right now." The CEO's lips tightened, but before he could speak, the woman reached into her coat again, this time pulling out a stack of worn, yellowed letters. She held them out. "He never gave you these." Daniel took them, fingers shaking. The first letter was dated 20 years ago. The handwriting was neat, careful. The words at the top were simple. "My sweet boy." His vision blurred. Every letter, every word was proof. Not only that she had never stopped loving him, but that his father had worked to erase her from his life completely. The CEO lunged forward to snatch them back, but Daniel stepped away, holding the letters close. A woman's voice broke. "I wasn't good enough for his world, Daniel. But you were my whole world." The boardroom was no longer silent. Whispers rose, sharp and quick, the kind that spread beyond walls. Reputations cracking. Control slipping. And then, before anyone could speak again, the woman turned toward the door. "Now you know," she said softly. "The rest is up to you." She walked out, her steps slow but unshaken, leaving Daniel standing in the middle of the room, letters clutched to his chest, his father staring at him with an expression he had never seen before. Not anger, not control. And Daniel realized this was only the beginning. The street was quiet now. The flashing lights were gone, the shouting had faded, but the weight in his chest, that stayed. He sat on the curb, head in his hands, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A part of him wanted to believe it was over, that the danger had passed, but deep down he knew it hadn't, because what happened to him wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a truth he could no longer ignore, that no matter how hard he worked, how much he achieved, or how respectful he tried to be, there would always be those who looked at his skin before they looked at his soul. He thought about the officer's hand hovering over the weapon, the way people had stared, the hesitation in their eyes, not whether he was guilty, but whether he even deserved the chance to prove he wasn't. When his mother arrived, she ran to him, her arms wrapping around his shoulders like she was holding on to life itself. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered, "I'm okay, Ma." But they both knew okay was a lie. In the days that followed, he replayed that moment again and again. The tone of the officer's voice, the disbelief on the faces in the crowd, the knowledge that if one thing had gone differently, if he'd moved too quickly, if the camera phones hadn't been recording, he might not be here to tell the story. He went back to work, but everything felt different. The boardroom meetings, the polished smiles, the careful handshakes, it was like watching the world from behind glass. On the outside, he was still the promising young executive. On the inside, he was carrying a scar that no one could see. But he refused to let that scar turn into silence. He began speaking. At community centers, in schools, even at company events, he told his story not to gain sympathy, but to force people to confront a truth they often ignored. He reminded them that racism isn't just something that happens in the headlines. It happens in the streets we walk every day, in the eyes that follow you in a store, in the doors that never open because of the name on your resume. And as he spoke, something began to shift. People leaned in, they asked questions, some cried, some looked away, uncomfortable. But the conversations started and they didn't stop. One night, he stood in front of a packed auditorium. His voice didn't shake anymore. He looked out at the faces, black, white, brown, young, old, and he said, "I survived that night, but I think about the ones who didn't, and I wonder how many more names will we have to say before enough is finally enough? How many more times will we hear the words, 'I can't breathe,' before the world decides to change?" My story is just one, but I'm telling it because maybe yours will be the one that makes them listen. The room was silent, and in that silence, the weight of the truth hung heavy. Not just his truth, but everyone's, because this wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a fight that belonged to all of us. If you've ever had to rebuild a relationship, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. Thank you for joining us.